Investigations and Oversight Subcommittee. We're here today to discuss online imposters and disinformation. Researchers generally define misinformation as information that is false but promulgated with sincerity by a person who believes it is true. Disinformation, on the other hand, is shared with the deliberate intent to deceive. It turns out that these days, the concepts of disinformation and online imposters are almost one and the same. We all remember the classic scams and hoaxes from the early days of email. A foreign prince needs help getting money out of the country. But today, the more common brand of disinformation is not simply content that is plainly counterfactual, but that is being delivered by someone who is not who they say they are. We are seeing a surge in coordinated disinformation efforts, particularly around politicians, hot-button political issues, and democratic elections. The 2016 cycle saw Russian troll farms interfering in the American discourse across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, trying to sway public opinion for their preferred candidate. But at the same time, they were after something else much simpler: to create chaos. By driving a wedge into the social fissures in our society, sowing seeds of mistrust about our friends and neighbors, exploiting social discord, they think they might destabilize our democracy and allow the oligarchy to look a little more attractive by comparison. When I was a Russian policy officer in the Navy, I learned how central information warfare is in Russia's quest to dominate Western nations. And unfortunately, modern technology makes information warfare a far easier proposition for antagonists, foreign or domestic. In fact, it's perhaps too easy today to proliferate convincing, harmful disinformation, build realistic renderings of people in videos, and impersonate others online. That's why the incidence of harmful episodes has exploded in the last few years. They range from fake reviewers misleading consumers on Amazon, to impersonating real political candidates, to fake pornography being created with the likenesses of real people. Earlier this year, an alleged deepfake of the president of Gabon helped trigger an unsuccessful coup of the incumbent government. Deepfakes are particularly prone to being weaponized, as our very biology tells us that we can trust our eyes and our ears. There are social science reasons why disinformation and online imposters are such a confounding challenge. Research has shown that online hoaxes spread 6 times as fast as true stories. For example, maybe human nature just likes a good scandal, and confirmation bias shapes how we receive information every time we log on or open an app. If we encounter a story, a video, or an influence campaign that seems a little less than authentic, we may still be inclined to believe it if the content supports the political narrative already playing in our own heads. Our digital antagonists, whether the intelligence service of a foreign adversary or a lone wolf propagandist working from a laptop, know how to exploit all of this. Our meeting today is the start of a conversation. Before we as policymakers can address the threat of fake news and online frauds, we have to understand how they operate, the tools we have today to address them, and where the next generation of bad actors is headed. We need to know where to commit more resources in the way of innovation and education. Our distinguished witnesses in today's panels are experts in the technologies that can be used to detect deepfakes and disinformation. And I'm glad they're here to help us explore these important issues. We're especially thankful that all 3 of you were able to roll with the punches when we had to move the hearing due to a change in the congressional schedule, so thank you all. I'd also like to thank my Republican counterparts who've been such great partners in this matter. He will be here shortly, but Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio is joining us today to inform his work on deepfakes. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of his bill, H.R. 4355. Here he is. And I thank you for being here, Mr. Gonzalez. Unfortunately, Ranking Member Norman could not be with us today, but we are happy to have the full committee ranking member in his place. So the chair now recognizes Mr. Lucas for an opening statement. Thank you, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Chairwoman Sherrill, for holding this hearing on a growing problem of disinformation on social media. We all know that photos these days can be digitally altered so easily that it's almost impossible to tell what's real and what's not. Now there's a growing problem where audio and video can be altered so convincingly that it can appear that someone has said or done something that never happened. These deep fakes can be produced more and more easily. You know, there was once a rumor that I myself was a deep fake, just impersonating the real Frank Lucas. The good news, or depending on your perspective, perhaps the bad news is the technology hasn't come quite that far, and I'm the real deal. But once it's on the internet, it never goes away. But deepfake technology is getting more and more sophisticated, and it's also getting easier to produce. As our witnesses will discuss today, the technology for generating deepfakes is improving at a rapid clip. Soon, anyone with a decent computer and access to training data will be able to create increasingly convincing deepfakes that are difficult to detect and debunk. False and misleading content like this undermines public trust and disrupts civil society. Unfortunately, the technology for generating deepfakes is developing at a speed and a scale that dwarfs the technology needed to detect and debunk deepfakes. We must help level the playing field. This committee took the first steps to do this yesterday by passing a bipartisan legislation aimed at improving research into the technology to detect deepfakes. I want to commend Representative Anthony Gonzalez for introducing this bill and his leadership on the issue of technology and security. I often say that one of our most important jobs on the Science Committee is communicating to the American people the value of scientific research and development. Legislation and hearings like this are a great example of how the work we do here can benefit directly people across the country. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I yield back my time, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Lucas. And we have an additional opening statement today from my colleague across the aisle, Representative Waltz of Florida. Unfortunately, Mr. Waltz could not make it to the hearing today, but considering his great interest in this, you have allowed him to submit a video of his opening statement. So we'll now hear from Mr. Waltz.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I can't be in town for the hearing today, but I wanted to make sure to share my concerns about digital imposters. Everyone in this room relies on social media, video messages, and other digital technology to connect with our constituents. We listen to their concerns, we share information about our work in Congress. But deepfake technology, which can literally put words in our mouths, undermines public trust in any digital communication. Today's witnesses will paint a picture of just how sophisticated the technology has become for creating realistic images, videos, and personalities online. Before I conclude my statement, I want to say a few words about our distinguished subcommittee chairman, Mikey Sherrill. I think we can all agree that Mikey is one of the most intelligent, accomplished, and persuasive members of Congress. In fact, she's so persuasive that she convinced me, a Green Beret, to cheer on Navy football in this year's rivalry game. Thanks, Chairwoman Sherrill, for bringing attention to the problems of deep fake technology. And go Navy, beat Army.
So, what a pleasure. As you all saw, that thank you so much for your work. That was obviously a deep fake. That is what we're looking at, and that is what we're discussing today. Thank you right? How nice was that? And sadly, knowing how deep the commitment to our respective services football is, I do know that that was not actually your sentiment, although it should be. So thank you, Mr. Waltz and Mr. Byer, for your willingness to participate in our deep fake demonstration. And thank you to our distinguished witnesses, Dr. Liu, for creating this video. I'll now recognize Mr. Byer and Mr. Waltz for a few remarks. Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. So Congressman Waltz and I really had fun making the deep fake video. You can see that it clearly wasn't just. As an Army brat, I would never throw a Green Beret under the bus. But you also see how dangerous and misleading it could be. I'm sure we fooled a couple of people. For instance, what if I'd said, instead of go Navy, go beat Army, I'd said, it's time to impeach the president. Well, that would be viral everywhere. I mean, the things would be ringing off the hook and the social media.
Please do not do that to my staff.
No. and Mr. Waltz would be the first to know. So my friends might appreciate it, but I don't think he would at all. So obviously the potential for serious harms with these deep fakes is quite great on elections, international states, for diplomatic purposes, and even for our private lives. That's why we as a country need to take swift action and invest in the research and the tools for identifying and combating deep fakes, and create a national strategy immediately, especially for election integrity and ahead of the 2020 presidential election. The stakes are high. We've got to act now. We already know of Russia's intentional campaign to spread disinformation throughout the last one, And I don't even want to imagine what Russia or China or just private players, the havoc they could wreak on our elections and our personal lives. So thank you very much to Mikey Sherrill and Frank Lucas for leading this effort. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Waltz?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And while I do certainly hold you in the highest regard, that was not me. But just to add to my colleagues, that's just an example and a small example of what a deepfake synthetic video can do. And we've seen this insidious capability. We're seeing, I think, the birth of it. But I certainly support my colleagues in how we can get our arms around this as a country. I think it's important to note that Mr. Byer and I both consented to that video, but as putting words in the mouth of a U.S. Army Green Beret and cheering on for Navy is not the worst application of this technology, and it's certainly not difficult to imagine how our enemies or criminal groups can wreak havoc on governments, on elections, on businesses, on competitors, and the privacy of all Americans. So these videos and this technology have the potential to truly be a weapon for our adversaries. We know that advanced deepfake technology exists within China and Russia. We know that they have the capability, and that both countries have demonstrated a willingness to use asymmetric warfare capabilities. So as the technology for generating deepfakes improves, we do risk falling behind on the detection front. That's why this hearing is so important, and I certainly commend you for calling it. It will help us examine solutions for both detecting and debunking the deepfakes of the future. And at the end of the day, I just have to say, go Army, beat Navy. I yield back.
I don't know why I let you testify in my hearing. No. Thank you very much. Those were really sobering comments, and I appreciate you both for showing us a little bit of what we're contending with. At this time, I would like to introduce our three witnesses. First, we have Dr. Siwei Liu. Dr. Liu is a professor at the University of Albany's College of Engineering and Applied Sciences. He is an expert in machine learning and media forensics. Next is Dr. Hani Farid. Dr. Farid is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science and the School of Information. Dr. Farid's research focuses on digital forensics, image analysis, and human perception. Lastly, we have Ms. Camille Francois. Ms. Francois is the Chief Innovation Officer at Graphica, a company that uses artificial intelligence to analyze online communities and social networks. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you all have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. And we'll start with you, Dr. Liu.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Sherrill, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me today to discuss the emerging issue of deepfakes. You have just seen a deepfake video we created for this hearing. So let me first briefly describe how this video and similar fake videos are made. Making a deepfake video requires a source and a target. In this case, the source was Representative Byer, and the target was Representative Waltz. Mr. Byer's staff was kind enough to prepare a video of the congressman for this project. While Mr. Waltz's office was consented to this video demonstration, it is important to note that we didn't use any video from his office. Instead, we conducted an internet search for about 30 minutes and found one suitable minute-long YouTube video of Mr. Waltz, and that's our target video. The next step involves a software tool we developed, which use deep neural networks to create the fake video. It is important to note that our tool does not use a generative adversary network, or GAN. It is first trains the deep neural network models using the source and the target video. It then uses the models to extract facial expressions in the source video of Mr. Byer and generate a video of Mr. Waltz with the same facial expressions. The audio track is from the original video of Mr. Byer and was not modified. The training and production are performed on a computer equipped with a graphical processing unit, or GPU. The computer and the GPU can be purchased from Amazon for about $3,000. The overall training and production took about 8 hours and were completely automated after setting a few initial parameters. So a similar process was also used to generate the fake videos that are being displayed on the screen right now. Although we do not distribute this particular software tool, similar software making deepfakes can be found on code sharing platforms like GitHub and are free for anyone to download and to use. With the abundance of online media we share, anyone is a potential target of a deepfake attack. Currently, there are active research development to identify, contain, and obstruct deepfakes before they can inflict damages. The majority of such research is currently sponsored by DARPA, most notably the Media4 program. But it is also important that the federal government fund more research through NSF to combat deepfakes. As an emerging research area that does not fall squarely into existing AI or cybersecurity programs, it may be wise to establish a new cross-functional program at NSF dedicating to similar emerging technologies. It can serve as an initial catch-all for similar high-risk and high-impact research until either an existing program's mission is expanded or a new dedicated program is established. We should also examine the approaches we share software code and tools, especially those with potential negative impacts like deepfakes. Therefore, it may be wise to consider requiring NSF to conduct reviews of sponsored AI research and enforcing controls on the release of software codes or tools with dual-use nature. This will help to reduce the potential misuses of such technologies. Last but not least, education on responsible research should be an intrinsic part of AI research. Investigators should be fully aware of the potential impact of the sponsored research and provide corresponding trainings to the graduate students and postdocs working on the project. Again, NSF could enforce such ethics training and best practices through mandatory requirement to sponsored research projects. The creation of new cross-function NSF programs for emerging technologies, the introduction of controls on the release of NSF-funded AI research with potential dual use, and the required ethics training for NSF-funded AI research will go far in defending against the emerging threat posed by deepfakes. Thank you for having this hearing today and giving me the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fareed?
Chairman Sherrill, Ranking Member Lucas, and members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today on this important topic. Although disinformation is not new, what is new in the digital age is the sophistication with which fake content can be created, the democratization of access to sophisticated tools for manipulating content, and access to the internet and social media, allowing for the delivery of disinformation with an unprecedented speed and reach. The latest incarnation in creating fake audio, image, and video, so-called deepfakes, is being fueled by rapid advances in machine learning and access to large amounts of data. Although there are several variations, the core machinery behind this technology is based on a combination of traditional techniques in computer vision and computer graphics, and more modern techniques from machine learning, namely deep neural networks. These technologies can, for example, from just hundreds of images of the chairwoman, splice her likeness into a video sequence of someone else. Similar technologies can also be used to alter a video of the chairwoman to make her mouth consistent with a new audio recording of her saying something that she never said. And when paired with highly realistic voice synthesis technologies that can synthesize speech in a particular person's voice, these deepfakes can make for example, CEO announce that their profits are down, leading to global stock manipulation. A world leader announcing military action, leading to global conflict. Or a presidential candidate confessing complicity to a crime, leading to the disruption of an election. The past 2 years have seen a remarkable increase in the quality and sophistication of these deep fakes. These technologies are not, however, just relegated to academic circles or Hollywood studios, but are freely available online and have already been incorporated into commercial applications. The field of digital forensics is focused on developing technologies for detecting manipulated or synthesized audio, images, and video. And within this field, there are two broad categories: proactive and reactive techniques. Proactive techniques work by using a specialized camera software to extract a digital signature from a recorded image or video. This digital signature can then be used in the future to determine if the content was manipulated from the time of recording. The benefit of this approach is that the technology is well understood and developed, it's effective, and it is able to work at the scale of analyzing billions of uploads a day. The drawback is that it requires all of us to use specialized camera software as opposed to the default camera app that we are all used to using, and it requires the collaboration of social media giants to incorporate these signatures and corresponding labels into their systems. Notice that these proactive techniques tell us what is real, not what is fake. In contrast, reactive techniques are focused on telling us what is fake. These techniques work on the assumption that digital manipulation leaves behind certain statistical, geometric, or physical traces that, although not necessarily visually obvious, can be modeled and algorithmically detected. The benefit of these techniques is that they don't require any specialized hardware or software. The drawback is that even despite advances in the field, there are no universal forensic techniques that can operate at the scale and speed needed to analyze billions of uploads a day. So, where do we go from here? 4 points. 1, funding agencies should invest at least as much financial support to programs in digital forensics as they are in programs that are fueling advances that are leading to the creation of, for example, deepfakes. 2, researchers that are developing technologies that can be weaponized should give more thought to how they can put proper safeguards in place so that their technologies are not misused. 3, no matter how quickly forensic technology advances, it will be useless without the collaboration of the giants of the technology sector. The major technology companies, including Facebook, Google, YouTube, and Twitter, must more aggressively and proactively develop and deploy technologies to combat disinformation campaigns. And 4, we should not ignore the non-technical component of the issue of disinformation, us, the users. We need to better educate the public on how to consume trusted information and not spread disinformation. I'll close with 2 final points. First, although there are serious issues of online privacy, moves by some of the technology giants to transform their platform to an end-to-end encrypted system will make it even more difficult to slow or stop the spread of disinformation. We should find a balance between privacy and security and not sacrifice one for the other. And lastly, I'd like to re-emphasize that disinformation is not new, and deepfakes is only the latest incarnation. We should not lose sight of the fact that more traditional human-generated disinformation campaigns are still highly effective, and we will undoubtedly be contending with yet another technological innovation a few years from now. In responding to deepfakes, therefore, we should consider the past, the present, and the future as we try to navigate the complex interplay of technology, policy, and regulation. And I'm sorry, I'm 15 seconds over.
Thank you very much. Ms. Francois?
Chairwoman Cheryl and Ranking Member Lucas, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. We're here to discuss the growing issue of online imposters and disinformation. As you know, this problem is nuanced and complex. I've been looking at disinformation campaigns for many years, and I have seen great diversity in the types of actors, techniques, and impacts that those disinformation campaigns can have. I want to highlight that while we tend to focus on fake content, the most sophisticated actors I have seen operate online actually tend to use authentic content weaponized against their targets. This is what I want to talk about a little bit more. It's really hard to give a sense of the growing and global scale of the issue, but here are a few recent examples. Today, a report by my colleagues over at the Oxford Internet Institute highlighted that more than 70 countries currently use computational propaganda techniques to manipulate public opinion online. Since October 2018, Twitter has disclosed information around more than 25,000 accounts associated with information operations in 10 different countries. Twitter is one thing. On Facebook, over 40 million users have followed pages that Facebook has taken down for being involved in what they call coordinated inauthentic behavior. Those may seem like huge numbers, but in fact they represent a needle in a haystack. And the danger of this particular needle is its sharpness. Targeting specific communities at the right time and with the right tactics can have a catastrophic impact on society or on an election. that impact remains very difficult to rigorously quantify. For instance, if you take a fake account, what matters is not just the number of followers it has, but who those followers are, how they have engaged with the campaign, and how they have engaged both online and offline. Similarly, for a piece of content, it's not often the payload that matters, but really the delivery system and the targeting system. We are finding more and more state and non-state actors producing disinformation. What keeps me awake at night on this issue is also the booming market of disinformation for hire. That means troll farms that one can rent, bot networks that one can purchase, for instance. These tools are increasingly attractive to domestic political actors who also use them to manipulate American audiences online. I see that you discovered how easy it was to make a deepfake, and I encourage you to also discover how easy it is to buy a set of fake accounts online, or frankly, to purchase a full-blown disinformation campaign. The good news here, if there is any, is that as a society and as a professional field, we've come a long way since 2016. These problems began long before 2016, but it really took the major Russian interference in the US election to force us towards a collective reckoning. In 2016, the top platforms, law enforcement, and democratic institutions sleepwalked through the Russian assault on American democratic processes. Those who raised the alarm were at best ignored. Today, we're in a better place. We have rules, definition, and emerging processes to tackle these campaigns. Coordination between researchers, platforms, and public agencies have proven successful, for instance, in protecting the US 2018 midterms from Russian disinformation efforts. Then, those actors worked hand in hand to detect, take down, and to a certain extent, to document the Russian attempts to deceive and manipulate voters. We still have a long way to go, but the scale of the problem is staggering. Sophisticated state actors, and again, a growing army of hired guns, are manipulating vast networks of interactions among billions of people on dozens of platforms and in hundreds of countries. This manipulation is discoverable, but almost in a way that a submarine is discoverable under the ocean. What you really need is sophisticated sensors that must evolve as rapidly as the methods of evasion. That requires a serious investment in the development of analytic models, computational tools, and domain expertise on adversary tradecraft. We need better technology, but also more people able to develop and adopt rapidly evolving methods. Accomplishing this also requires access to data, and that is currently the hardest conversation on this topic. The task at hand is to design a system that guarantees user security and privacy while ensuring that the core of scientists, researchers, and analysts can access the data they need to unlock the understanding of the threats and harness innovative ways to tackle the issue. Today, we're very far from having such a system in place. We critically need not just the data, but the community of scholars and practitioners to make sense of it. That emerging field of people dedicated to ensuring the integrity of online conversation needs support, funding, and a shared infrastructure.
Thank you, Ms. Francois. We'll have to get to the rest of it as we go through the questions, but thank you very much. So let's see, at this point we'll begin our first round of questions, and I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'd just like to start with Dr. Farid and Dr. Liu, because we read a lot about the potential for deepfakes to be used on political candidates. And we watched Dr. Liu's very compelling example here in this room, so thank you for that brilliant demonstration. I hope my fellow members of Congress who aren't in the room today will actually get a chance to see for themselves and hear just how limitless the potential impacts of deepfakes can be. Let's talk about some hard truths. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think are the chances of a convincing video deepfake of a political candidate, someone running for Congress or president or governor, emerging during the 2020 election cycle, and why do you think that?
I'm going to say 5 because it minimizes my chances of being wrong. And for another reason too, that I think we shouldn't, despite the sophistication of deepfakes, we shouldn't overlook that traditional disinformation works really well. And it's easy, right? Teenagers in Macedonia were responsible for a lot of the disinformation campaigns we saw in 2016. So I think it's coming. I don't know whether it'll be in 2020 or 2022 or 2024, but largely because the cheap stuff still works and it's going to work for a while. I think we'll eventually get out ahead of that, and then this will be the new front. But I think it is just a matter of time. We've already seen nefarious uses of deepfakes for cases of fraud. And I think the bigger threat here is not going to be, the first threat I predict is not going to be an actual deepfake, but the plausible deniability argument. That a real video will come out and somebody will be able to say, that's a deep fake. And that in some ways is the larger threat that I see coming down the road, is once anything can be faked, nothing is real anymore. And I think that's probably more likely to happen before the first real deep fake comes out.
That's interesting. Dr. Liu?
Yes, thank you for the question. As actually I mentioned in the opening remarks, the technical capability of making high-quality deepfakes is already at the disposal of whoever wants to make it. As I mentioned, the deepfake videos we made, we have a specially made software, but anybody can potentially also develop similar softwares based on the open source version on the GitHubs, and then they can just buy a computer for about a couple $1,000s, and then run this for a couple of hours. Everything is automatic. So this is really the reality that people who ever want to make these kind of videos, they have that capacity. However, the question whether we will see such a video in the coming election really depends, as Professor Farid mentioned, a lot of other factors. Especially, deepfake is not the only approach for disinformation. So it is kind of difficult to come up with a precise number there, but the possibility is certainly substantial. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, Ms. Francois, you have a lot of experience observing how trolls and bots behave when they identify a hoax they might want to spread. If a convincing deep fake of a Politico emerges next year, what do you expect the bot and troll participation to look like in proliferating the video? In other words, will we see this sort of erupt all at once, or does it percolate in dark areas of the internet for a short period of time before it emerges? How does that work?
All of the above are possible. I will say that if we are facing a sophisticated actor able to do a convincing deepfake, they will be able to do a convincing false amplification campaign too.
Thank you very much. And then, Dr. Farid, you said in your testimony that researchers working on technologies to detect disinformation should give more thought to proper safeguards so their work cannot be misused or weaponized. What kind of safeguards do you believe could be adopted voluntarily by the research community to protect against the spread of disinformation?
Good. So I think there's two things that can be done. So first, you have to understand in computer science, we have an open source culture, which means we publish work and we put it out there. That's been the culture, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful culture. But when that technology can be weaponized, maybe we should think about putting the data in the code in a GitHub repository where anybody can download it, as Professor Liu was saying. So that's number one, is just think about how you disseminate. We can still publish and not put the details of it out so that anybody can grab it, number one. Number two is there are mechanisms by which we can incorporate into synthetic media watermarks that will make it easier for us to identify that. That can become a standard. We can say academic publishers who are going to post code should incorporate into the result of their technology a distinct watermark. That is not bulletproof. It's not that it can't be attacked, but it's at least a first line of defense. So those are the two obvious things that I can see.
That was perfect timing. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I would now like to recognize Mr. Lucas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Farid, following up on what the chair was discussing, in your written statement you say that no matter how quickly forensic technology for detecting deep fakes develops, it'll be useless without the cooperation of the technology giants like Google and Facebook. How do we bring those people to the table to begin this collaboration?
Yeah. So the bad news is they have been slow to respond for decades, really. It's not just disinformation. This is the latest, from child sexual abuse to terrorism to conspiracy theories to illegal drugs, illegal weapons. The technology sector has been very slow to respond. That's the bad news. The good news is, I think, a combination of pressure from here on Capitol Hill, from Brussels, from the UK, and from the public, and from advertisers, there is now an acknowledgement that we have a problem. Step number one. Step number two is, what are we going to do about it? And I still think we are very slow here, and what you should understand is we are fighting against business interests, right? The business model of Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter is data. It's content. Taking down content is bad for business. And so we have to find mechanisms to, either through regulatory pressure, advertising pressure, or public pressure, bring them to the table. I will say the good news is in the last 6 months, at least the language coming out of the technology sector is encouraging. I don't know that there's a lot of action yet. So I'll give you an example. We all saw a few months ago a altered video of Speaker Pelosi. This was not a confusing video. We all knew it was fake, and yet Facebook gleefully let it on their platform. In fact, defended the decision to leave it on their platform, saying, we are not the arbiters of truth. Okay, so we have two problems now. We have a policy problem, and we have a technology problem. I can help with the technology problem. I don't know what I can do about the policy problem when you say we are not the arbiters of truth. So I think we have to have a serious look at how to put more pressure on the technology sector, whether that's regulatory or legislative or advertising or public pressure, and they have to start getting serious as to how their platforms are being weaponized to great effect in disrupting elections and inciting violence and sowing civil unrest. I don't think they've quite come to grips with that reality.
Well, when that moment comes, and inevitably it will, in your opinion, what will that collaboration look like? There's a government element, there's an academic element, there's a public-private partnership element.
Yeah.
Can you just
Sure.
daydream for a moment here with me?
So I think the good news is the Facebooks and the Googles of the world have started to reach out to academics, myself included, Professor Liu included. We now receive research funding to help them develop technology. That's good. I think the role of the government is to coax them along with regulatory pressure. I think what we've noticed over the last 20 years is self-regulation is not working. I'd like it to work, but it doesn't work in this particular space. So I think the role of the government can be through oversight, it can be regulatory, it can be through a cyber ethics panel that is convened to talk about the serious issues of how technology is being weaponized in society. But very much, I think the academic industry model has to work because most of the research that we are talking about is happening at the academic side of things. And obviously the industry has different incentives than we do in the academy. So I think there is room for everybody. I'll also mention this is not bounded by US borders. This is very much an international problem. So we should be looking across the pond to our friends in the UK and the EU and New Zealand and Australia and Canada and bringing everybody on board because this is a problem for not just us, but for the whole world.
One last question. In your written testimony, you suggest there's a non-technological component to solving the problem related to deepfakes and disinformation. Specifically, you wrote that we need to educate the public on how to consume trusted information and how to be better digital citizens. What should this public education initiative look like?
I'm always reluctant to say this because I know how taxed our schools are in this country. But at some point, this is an educational issue starting from grade school on the way up. And as an educator, I think this is our role. We have to have digital citizenry classes. Some of the European countries have done this. France is starting to do this. The UK is starting to do it. Public service announcements explaining to people how information can be trusted, what disinformation is. But we've got to start taking more seriously how we educate the next generation and the current generation. And whether that's through the schools, through PSAs, through industry-sponsored PSAs, I think all of those are going to be needed.
And you would agree that our technology giant friends have a role in that education process
They
too?
absolutely have a role. They made this mess. They need to help fix it.
Very concise. Thank you, Doctor. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. And now, Ms. Wexton, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists for appearing today. I want to speak a little bit about the explosive growth that the major social platforms have experienced over the past few years, because I'm worried that these companies are more focused on growth and getting more users than they are about essential oversight and user support functions. And in fact, as has been noted, they disclaim responsibility for any information that goes out onto the web by the users. And in fact, it seems to me that they have a disincentive to purge suspicious or fake or bot accounts. I have here an article from July of last year where Twitter's stock price went down by about 8.5% after they purged, over the course of 2 months, 70 million suspicious accounts. Now, don't feel too bad for Twitter because their stock price went up 75% over that 6-month period, but by being socially responsible or by being responsible, it hurt their bottom line. Now, the platforms are incredibly powerful. We have already seen the power that they have here in the Capitol, not just because of the lobbyists and everything, but because we all use them. We all have those platforms on our phones and on our various devices. And Dr. Fareed, you spoke a little bit about how the basic features of the technology and the business model at social media companies kind of help exacerbate the proliferation of disinformation. Can you explain from a business perspective what benefit a bot account or a fake account might represent for a social media company?
Sure. So first of all, I think you're absolutely right that growth has been priority number one. And because the metrics of Silicon Valley are number of users, number of minutes online, it's because that's what eventually leads to advertising dollars. What we have to understand is that Silicon Valley, for better or worse today, is driven by ad revenue. And ad revenue is optimized by having more engagement. Okay? So fake account, real account, don't care. Fake like, real like, fake tweet, doesn't matter, right? Because at the end of the day, you get to report big numbers to the advertisers who are going to pay more money. Whether 50% of those accounts are fake or not, who's to know? So that's the underlying poison, if you will, of Silicon Valley, I think, and is the reason why the system is entirely frictionless by design. There is no friction to create an account on Twitter or on Facebook or on YouTube because they want that to be easy. They want bots to be able to create these things because that is what elevates the numbers. And I think this is sort of our core problem that we have here.
So related to that, why would social media companies allow or even encourage their recommendation algorithms to
Good.
put people, to direct users to
Good.
suggested videos or things like that that are sensational or even false? Why would they do that?
The metric on YouTube is engagement. How long do you stay on the platform? And so what the algorithms learn is that if I show you a video that is conspiratorial or outrageous, you're more likely to click on it and watch it. If you are more likely to click or watch, you're going to stay on the platform longer, right? So the algorithms are not trying to radicalize you. What they are trying to do is to keep you on the platform for as long as possible. And it turns out in the same way that people will eat candy all day long instead of broccoli, people will watch crazy videos all day long instead of PBS. I don't think this is surprising. And so the underlying algorithms, what they are being optimized for, in part, is exactly this. And we have been studying the nature of these conspiracy videos for over a year now, and I will tell you that despite claims to the contrary, there is a rabbit hole effect. That once you start watching the slightly crazy conspiratorial videos, you will get more and more and more of that because you are more likely to click, you are more likely to view, they're going to get more data, and they're going to sell more advertising. That's the underlying business model, is how long do you stay on my platform? And in that regard, the quality of the information is utterly unimportant to the platforms. It is what keeps you there.
So maybe we should all have more cats and kittens and less conspiracy.
I'm all for cat videos.
So switching gears a little bit, yesterday this committee, we marked up a bill, it was Congressman Gonzalez's bill, that would expand research into technologies to help us better identify deepfake videos. And I had an amendment which was made in order and approved by the committee to help increase education to help people identify deepfake videos. And so I was encouraged to hear you talk about that. So I would inquire of the panel, do you have any advice on what the most important elements of a public education campaign on deepfake videos should be?
Again, I am reluctant to put this on our public schools. I think they are overtaxed and overworked and underfunded. But at the end of the day, this is sort of where it belongs. And I think if we can do this not as an unfunded mandate, but actually give them the resources to create courses of digital citizenry, of how you are a better digital citizen, how you can trust information and not trust information. I'll point out too, though, by the way, it's not just the young people. The senior citizens among us are more likely to share fake news than the young people. So this is across the spectrum. So I'm more of this, for me, the educational level is more about the next 20, 30, 40 years than necessarily today. So I think a combination of PSAs about returning to trusted sources and about educating kids, not just, by the way, about trusted information, but how to be a better digital citizen, how to interact with each other. The vitriol that we see online is absolutely horrific, and the things that we accept online we would never accept in a room like this. And I think we have to start teaching the next generation that this is not a way that we interact with each other. We need a more civil discourse.
Thank you, Dr. Fareed. And I'd now like to recognize Mr. Biggs for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate each of the witnesses for being here. It's a very, very interesting hearing, and appreciate the chair for convening this hearing. So one of the many things I'm worried about is the de facto gray area between misinformation and disinformation, despite the seemingly clear definitional difference between these concepts. While disinformation may be defined in terms of the malicious intent on the part of the sender, such intent, as we've seen today, can at times be very difficult to identify. And then on top of that, we need to make sure the gatekeepers themselves trying to police content are objective enough to identify potential misinformation and able to do so as expeditiously as possible. It seems to me that even if we have the technological anti-disinformation tools that we've learned about in this discussion and that we anticipate seeing developed over time, human judgment will always be a key component of any anti-deepfakes effort, and human judgment can, of course, be fallible. In short, the difficulties and nuances of the battle pile up the deeper we delve into this topic. Maybe that's why I find it so interesting to hear what you all have to say today. But I want to just get back to something, and I would say I feel like we've been doing what I would call an endogenous look, and that is, what's the technology here? And you mentioned it, Dr. Farid, in item 4 on page 4 of your recommendations in your written report. But it really gets to what I think is a real-world problem, and I'd like all of you to respond to. And the last questioner just kind of touched on it a bit as well. What do you tell a 13 or 14-year-old that you're trying to warn of potential disinformation, misinformation? How do you do it as a parent, as a grandparent, as someone who cares for, loves for an individual? I mean, that really becomes a part of the equation as much as anything else on the technological side.
Well, thank you for asking the question. Because the nature of my work, I usually show a lot of fake videos to my 12-year daughter. And she actually grew the habit of distrust any video I showed to her. So I think this may be a very effective way to actually tell them, just show them that the existence of fake videos will make them aware that those are something they should be careful about.
I can take the question on, what goes beyond technology, and I want to talk about one specific example. I think when you look at the most sophisticated campaigns that have leveraged disinformation, and we're talking about actors who were willingly doing this, there's still a lot that we don't know. So back to the Russian example, for instance, which is largely seen as the best documented campaign, right, on which the platforms have shared a lot of data. I have myself worked with the Senate Select Intelligence Committee to document what happened. There's still essential pieces of that campaign that we know nothing about and on which there's no data in the eye of the public to really understand how that technology was leveraged to manipulate audiences. Direct messages and how the Russians used to target deliberately specific journalists to feed them sources. We don't know anything about the scale of how much of that was going on. Similarly, what the GRU was doing alongside the IRA is something that there's zero available data on. So I would go back to those important and large-scale campaigns that we know have really disrupted society and interrogate, where are our blind spots? How can we do better? How can we produce this data so that we actually are able to fully understand those tactics? And then, of course, to build the tools to detect it, but also to train people to understand it and to build defenses.
Thank you. Dr. Farid? What are you going to tell your kid?
I fortunately don't have kids, so I don't have to struggle with this problem.
They're a blessing and a curse.
I think this is difficult because the fact is this generation is growing up on social media,
yes,
and they are not reading the Washington Post and the New York Times and MSNBC right, and Fox News. They think about information very differently. And I can tell you what I tell my students, which is do not confuse information with knowledge. Those are very different things. And I think there is this tendency that it's online, therefore it must be true. And so my job as an educator is to make you critically think about what you are reading. And I don't know how to do that on a sort of day-to-day basis, but I do that every day with my students, which is to critical reasoning. And with critical reasoning, I think everything comes. And if I may, I wanted to touch one, because I think you made a good point about the sort of the nuance between mis and disinformation. And yeah, we should acknowledge that there are going to be difficult calls. There is going to be content online that falls into this gray area that it's not clear what it is. But there is black and white things out there, and we should start dealing with that right now, and then we'll deal with that gray area when we need to. But let's not get confounded with that gray area and not deal with the real clear-cut harmful content.
Right, so information's not knowledge. I'd like to tell people in Congress, activity is not progress either. So, I mean,
We agree on that.
Thank you, Mr. Biggs. And next, I would like to recognize Mr. Byer for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Ms. Francois, so Dr. Liu talked about funding more civilian research through the National Science Foundation and setting up a emerging technologies directorate. And you spoke about this emerging field of interdisciplinary scholars, practitioners that need to support funding and shared infrastructure. How best do you see us making that happen? Do we need congressional legislation? How big a budget does it have to be? Is it only NSF or NIST or?
That's a great question, thank you. I think it can be a whole of government effort, and I do think that series of institutions have to get involved because indeed, as I said, it's very interdisciplinary. I do think that regulation has to play a role too, notably to address those critical and complex questions like the one of data access that I discussed. I want to build on a point that Dr. Farid made about the algorithmic reinforcement as an example. This is something that we know is impacting society. People watch one video and seem to end up in a filter bubble of conspirational video. But unfortunately, we have very little serious research on the matter. We are making those observations on a purely empirical basis out of people who let their computers run. We can't afford to be in the dark on the impact of technology on society like this. And in order to do serious scientific research on those impacts at scale, we need data and we need the infrastructure to systematically measure and assess how this technology is impacting our society.
Thank you very much. Dr. Farid, I was fascinated you talked about determining what's real rather than what's fake, and specifically talking about control capture technologies. We've had a number of Science Committee hearings on blockchain technology, which inevitably lead into quantum computing technology. Is blockchain and ultimately QC the right way to deal with this?
I think blockchain can play a role here. So the basic idea, for those who don't know, blockchain, basically all you have to know is that it's an immutable distributed ledger. So immutable, when you put information on there, it doesn't change. Distributed is it's not stored on one central server, but on millions of computers, so you don't have to rely on trust of one individual. So one version of control capture is at the point of capture, you extract that unique signature, you cryptographically sign it, and you put that signature on the blockchain for public viewing of it and public access to it. It's a very nice application of blockchain. I don't think it's critical to the solution. If you have a trusted central server, I think that would work well, but the reason why people like the blockchain is that I don't have to trust a Facebook or an Apple or a Microsoft. I can trust the globe. So I do see that as being part of the control capture environment and being part of the solution of a universal standard that says, if you want your content to be trusted, take it with this control capture, and then we can trust that going down the line. I think we're eventually going to get there. I think it's just a matter of time.
Great. And Dr. Liu, how would you contrast watermarking technology with the blockchain, with the control capture? And is one better than the other? Do you need both, or?
I think these two technologies are somehow complementary. So watermark is the content you actually embed into the image, and blockchains are ways to actually authenticate if the watermark is consistent with the original contents we embedded into the signal. So they can work together. You can imagine that we have watermark also being part of the blockchain uploaded to the remote distributed server. So they can work hand in hand in this case. But watermarks can also work independently as a single capture control mechanism for authenticity of the media.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank you.
Ms. Francois, again, you talked about how the big data players, the Facebooks and Twitters and stuff, obviously are a huge part of the potential problem with source material and have to be part of the solution. And you mentioned regulation as one of the pieces of the NSF NIST piece. Not that you can do it in 45 seconds, but anything that you guys can prepare to help our Energy and Commerce Committee, the committees in both houses looking at how we manage the media, the social media giants, would be very, very appreciated. Because understanding how they've gone from basically unregulated unicorn game changers in our society to how they can properly play within the rules is going to be a really, really big challenge for us.
I think it's going to be a lot of moving pieces. It's a complex problem, as I said, and I do believe that there's a lot of different bodies of regulation that can be applied and brought to bear to tackle it. One that is often left out of the conversation, but I just want to highlight here, is consumer protection. Dr. Farid talked about how the advertisers are getting the fake clicks. This can be a consumer protection issue. So different bodies of regulation, from cybersecurity to consumer protection, to address the whole of the disinformation problem, plus serious pressure to ensure that the data that the field needs is being shared in a way that makes it actionable for people.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I yield back.
Thank you. Next, I'd recognize Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Ms. Francois, going back to the disinformation campaigns that the Russians, Iranians, and others have ongoing, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security have briefed us that they're confident, at least at this point in time, that active hacking into our election infrastructure has diminished, at least for now. Although I am and other colleagues have worked to ensure that critical infrastructure is secured going forward, and this committee has done work on that as well. But I'm interested in the disinformation piece of it. Are you seeing increasing evidence of our adversaries conducting disinformation against individuals, whether they're thought leaders, journalists, politicians? For example, I could foresee hawks on Iran policy or Russia or others being specifically targeted during an election in order to change that election outcome and therefore change our policy and voices. Are you seeing an increase there? What types of techniques are you seeing, and where are you seeing it aside from the United States? One of the things that I've pushed is for us to share what we're gathering, for example, the Taiwanese elections or other elections, for us to create a collaborative approach with our allies as well. This is a problem with the West, and I think with free speech and free thought as much as it is with 2020 elections. I'd welcome your thought. And then secondly, what would you think the response would be if we took more of a deterrence measure? For example, sending the signal that the Iranians, the Russians, and other bad actors, they have their own processes and they have their own concerns, and often these regimes are more concerned with their own survival than they are with anything else, and at least demonstrating that we have that capability to interfere as well. I know that may present a lot of moral and ethical questions of whether we should have that capability and whether we should demonstrate we should use it, but we've certainly taken that approach with nuclear weapons. And so I'd welcome your thoughts there.
Thank you. I want to start by saying that part of it, yes, I am seeing an increase. Part of it is an increase. The other part is simply just a reckoning, as I said. Iran is a good example. We see a lot of disinformation campaign originating from the Iranian state, who's a very prolific actor in that space. Now, people often ask me, oh, Iran is following the Russian model. In reality, the first Iranian campaign to use social media to target US audiences date back from 2013, where we were asleep at the wheel and not looking for them. So despite our reckoning with sort of the diversity of actors who have been engaged with these techniques to target us, there is also an increase in both their scale and their sophistication. This is a cat and mouse game, and so what we also see is as we detect actors and their techniques, they increase the sophistication. They make it harder for us to do the forensics that we need in order to catch those campaigns as they unfold. Thank you for raising the question of deterrence. I do think that this ultimately is a cyber policy issue too, and therefore the government has a role to play. In the case of the US midterms in 2018, we saw US Cyber Command target the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg in an act of at least attempted cyber deterrence. So I do think that there is a governmental response too, by putting this problem in the broader context of cyber issue and cyber conflict.
Thank you for raising that. I think it's important for my colleagues to note that was a policy change under this administration that then allowed Cyber Command to take those kind of what they call active defensive measures in taking election security very seriously. Do you think, so I want to distinguish, though, between active defense and the potential, at least, and sending the signal that we have the potential for offense. And your thoughts there on the United States also participating in disinformation, or at least a deterrent capability. At the end of the day, I think we can only do so much in playing defense here. We can only counter so much of this cat and mouse game. We have to fundamentally change our adversaries' behavior and put them at risk and their regimes at risk, in my own view. But I'd welcome your thoughts in my remaining time.
Yeah, I think the 8 minutes to answer this complex question on the dynamics of deterrence and resilience in cyberspace. I will say what immediately comes to mind is, of course, the question of escalation. How much of these dynamics contribute to escalation is something that is an unknown in this space. So far, I think that the approach of being much more aggressive in both catching these campaigns, deactivating them, and publicly claiming that we have found them and this is what they look like, seems to be a welcome move in this area. I think by exposing what actors are doing, we are also contributing to raising the cost for them to engaging in these techniques.
Well, that was well done.
Thank you.
Ms. Francois. Thank you. Next, I recognize Mr. Gonzalez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here to our witnesses and your work on this topic. Very important topic, and one that's a little bit new to Congress, but one that, alongside of the Madam Chair and others on this committee, we've been excited to lead on, and I think we're making progress, unlike some other areas of Congress that I'm a part of. But in any event, so that being said, Dr. Liu, I want to start with you, and I really just want to understand kind of where we are in the technology from the standpoint of cost. So if, call it 2 decades ago, I used the Forrest Gump example yesterday. You know, Forrest Gump, if you've seen the movie, makes it look like he's shaking hands with presidents and all kinds of things, and you can't tell the difference except for you just know that there's no way that happened. Hollywood studio could have produced that, but it's costly back then, right? However much it costs. Today, I think some numbers came out that you were citing, roughly a couple $1,000s. How quickly is the cost going down to the point that this will be something, a weapon, if you will, that a 16-year-old sitting behind his computer could pull off?
I think this is basically, we used to call this Moore's Law, where the computational power just got doubled every 18 months. And I think Moore's Law has already been broken with the coming of GPUs. The computational power we're at our hand is extremely higher than we have imagined before. And this trend is growing. So I'll predict in the coming years, it will become cheaper and easier, and also to produce this kind of videos, and the computer hardwares and algorithms all get rapid improvement.
Yeah.
So that's coming. I think it's a coming event. Thank you.
Thanks. And I actually think, we talk a lot about great power competition in Iran and China and Russia, and I think that makes sense. I'm also maybe equally concerned about just a random person somewhere in society who has access to this and can produce these videos without any problem, and the damage that can cause. And I don't know that we've talked enough about that, frankly. But switching to Ms. Francois, you talked about how you found 70 countries use computational propaganda techniques in your analysis. And obviously a lot of this is spread through the platforms, and I think you talked really well about just how you can go down rabbit holes in the engagement metrics and things like that. What do you think, and Dr. Farid, I'd welcome your comments as well, what do the platforms themselves need to be doing differently? Because it strikes me that they're being somewhat, or I would argue grossly irresponsible with how they manage some of the content on their systems today.
That's a great question. I just want to precise that the 70 countries metric comes from the Oxford Internet Institute report that was published today.
Okay, thank you.
For me, the platform's play here is actually quite simple, and I would say clearer rules, more aggressive action, more transparency.
Yeah.
Let's start with clearer rules. Some platforms still don't have a rule that governments are not allowed to leverage their services in order to manipulate and deceive. And they will say they have rules that kind of go to this point, tangentially, but there's still a lot of more clear rules that needs to be established. To the second point, aggressive enforcement. There's still a lot of these campaigns that go under the radar and that go undetected. They need to put the means to the table to make sure that they actually are able to catch and detect and take down as much of this activity as possible. My team this week published a large report on a spam campaign that was targeting Hong Kong protesters from Chinese accounts, and then
Yep.
they had to take it down. There's more that they can do. Finally, transparency. It's very important that the platform continue and increase their degree of transparency in saying what they're seeing on their services, what they're taking down, and share the data back to the field.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. My fear is, we're going to do the best we can. I don't know that, one, this is intellectually difficult to figure out as Congress, and it's also politically difficult, which to me puts it in that like never, never land if it's going to take a while. So my hope is that the social media platforms understand their responsibility and come to the forefront with exactly what you said, because if not, I don't know that we're going to get it right, frankly. But with my final question, I'll throw just the word mental health and the platforms themselves and misinformation. Any studies that you're aware of that are showing the impacts on mental health, in particular of teenagers, with respect to what's going on the platforms today? Anybody can answer that.
Again, I want to say that in this field, we direly lack the data infrastructure and access to be able to do robust at-scale studies. So there is a variety of wonderful studies that are doing their best with small and more qualitative approaches, which are really, really important, but we're still direly lacking an important piece of doing rigorous research in this area.
Thank you, and I'll follow up with additional questions on how we can get that data and be smarter about that in Congress. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Fareed, I understand you developed a seminal tool for Microsoft called PhotoDNA that detects and weeds out child pornography as it's posted online. Can you talk about how this tool works? Could this be used to address harmful memes and doctored images? And how did the social media companies respond to this?
So PhotoDNA was a technology that I developed in 2008, 2009 in collaboration with Microsoft and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Its goal was to find and remove the most horrific child sexual abuse material online. The basic idea is that the technology reaches into an image, extracts a robust digital signature that will allow us to identify that same piece of material when it is re-uploaded. NCMEC is currently home to 80 million known child sexual abuse material, and so we can stop the proliferation and redistribution of that content. Last year alone, in 1 year, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's cyber tip line received 18 million reports of CSAM being distributed online. That's 2,000 an hour. 98% of that material was found with PhotoDNA. It has been used for over a decade and has been highly effective. Two more things. It can absolutely be, that same core technology can be used, for example, to find the Christchurch video, the Speaker Pelosi video, the memes that are known to be viral and dangerous. It can be, once content is detected, it can be, the signature can be extracted and we can stop the redistribution. And to your question of how the technology companies respond, I think the answer is not well. They were asked in 2003 to do something about the global distribution of child sexual abuse material, and for 5 years they stalled. They did absolutely nothing. We're not talking about complicated issues here, gray areas. We're talking about 4-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds being violently raped, and the images and the videos of them through these horrific acts being distributed online. And the moral compass of Silicon Valley for the last decade has been so fundamentally broken, they couldn't wrap their heads around about their responsibility to do something about that. That doesn't bode well, by the way, for going forward. So I think that history is really important, and we have to remember that they come begrudgingly to these issues. And so we have to coax them along the way.
Thank you very much. So these images have digital signatures even before we talk about the capture control technology or the watermark technology.
That's exactly right. So these don't have to be captured with specific hardware. So what we do is after the point of recording, we reach in and we find a distinct signature that will allow us to identify with extremely high reliability that same piece of content. And that can be child abuse material, it can be a bomb-making video, it can be a conspiracy video, it can be copyright infringement material, it can be anything.
But it has to show up first
That's
in a
right.
public space.
Yeah.
At least once, and we have to know that it's there in order to capture this.
That's the drawback. But the good news is that technology works at scale. It works at the scale of 1 billion uploads to Facebook a day and 500 hours of YouTube video a minute. And that's a really hard engineering problem to tackle, but this technology actually works, unlike many of the other algorithms that have extremely high error rates and would simply have too many mistakes.
Thank you very much. Dr. Liu, you talked about using AI to find AI. And that the more deep neural networks are used to detect the fakes. But there's a sense that the good guys are always trying to catch up the bad guys, the cat and mouse. Is there any way around the cat and mouse nature of the problem? Which, by the way, we just saw before. It's got to be out there before you can tag it and chase it down.
That's a very good question. Actually, I think on this point, I'm more pessimistic because I don't think there's a way we can escape that because that's the very nature of this kind of problem. Unlike other research area where the problem is fixed, we're basically dealing with a moving target. Whenever we have a new detection or deterrent algorithms, the adversaries will always try to improve their synthesis algorithm to beat us. So I think in the long run, this will be the situation that's going on, will keep going. But that also emphasizes Dr. Ferre's point that we need more investment onto the side of detection and protection for the sake that we have a lot more resources put into making deepfakes for all kinds of reasons. But the detection has not been catching up with the investment in detection has not been catching up with that level. So that's part of my testimony is encouraging the federal government to put more investment into this important area.
Great.
Thank you.
Ms. Francois.
Yes, if I may add a very simple metaphor here, I think we also have a leveling of the playing field issue. We're currently in a situation where there is a lot of cats and very few mouses. We need to bring the resources to the table that correspond to the actual scale and gravity of the problem.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thanks. Didn't know I was going to get a few extra seconds. So I just want to drill down on that data sharing component. So you mentioned that we just need a better data sharing infrastructure. Can you just take me as deep as you can on that? What do we need specifically? Just help me understand that.
Yes. There are many different aspects to what we need, and I think that both the infrastructure, people involved in type of data depend on the type of usage. So for instance, facilitating academic access to at-scale data on the effects of technology on society is ultimately a different issue than ensuring that cybersecurity professionals have access to the types of forensics that correspond to high-scale manipulation campaign that enables them to build better detection tools. And so I think the first step in tackling this problem is recognizing the different aspects of it.
Got it.
Of course, the key components here is security and privacy, which here go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. What you don't want is to enable scenarios like Cambridge Analytica where data abuses lead to more manipulation. Similarly, when we see disinformation campaigns, we often see a lot of real citizens who are caught into these nets and they deserve the protection of their privacy. If you go down sort of the first rabbit hole of ensuring that cybersecurity professionals have access to the type of data and associated forensics that they need in order to do this type of detection at scale and to build the forensics tool we need at scale, there's still, as I said, a lot we can do. The platforms right now are sharing some of the data that they have on these types of campaigns, but in a completely haphazard way. So they are free to decide when they want to share, what they want to share, and in which format. Often the format they're sharing them in are very inaccessible. So my team has worked to create a database that makes that accessible to researchers. That's one step we can take. And again, and I'll wrap on that because this can be a deep rabbit hole, but you pushed me down this way. Again, if we take the Russia example, for instance, when we scope a collection around something that we consider to be a national security, of national security importance, we need to make sure we have the means to ensure that the picture we're looking at is comprehensive.
Right.
Our own false sense of security in looking at the data, thinking that they represent the comprehensive picture of what happened and was directed at us, is a problem in our preparations for election security.
Thank you. Dr. Freed, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, and I think Ms. Francois mentioned this, is there's this tension between privacy and security, and you're seeing this particularly post-Cambridge Analytica. And I will mention, too, that this is not, again, just a U.S. issue. This is a global issue. And with things like GDPR, it has made data sharing extremely more complex for the technology sector.
Yeah.
So, for example, we've been trying to work with the sector to build tools to find child predators online. And the thing we keep running up against is we can't share this stuff because of GDPR. We can't share it because of privacy. I think that's a little bit of a false choice, but there is a sensitivity there that we should be aware of.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, certainly, I think what you highlight, which I agree with, is there are gray areas, sure,
Yep.
okay, but there are also like big bright lines, child pornography. Let's get that off our platforms.
Yeah, I agree. And it feels to me like if you share child pornography, you have lost the right to privacy. I don't think you have a right to privacy anymore. Once you've done that, I should have access to your account. So I think there's a little bit of a false narrative coming out here, but I still want to recognize that there are some sensitivities, particularly with the international standards. The Germans have very specific rules, the Brits, the EU, et cetera.
So the last question, and this is maybe a bit of an oddball, but so with the 8chan site that was ultimately brought down, I believe Cloudflare was their host, is that
Yeah.
right? So we talk a lot about the platforms themselves, right? But we don't always talk about the underlying infrastructure and maybe what responsibilities they have.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Should we be looking there as well?
You should. And it is complicated because when you go to a Cloudflare, as the CEO came out and said, I woke up one day and I thought, I don't like these guys and I'm going to kick them off my platform. That is dangerous.
That's very dangerous.
Yes,
Yeah.
but Ms. Francois said it very well. Clear rules, enforce the rules, transparency. We have to have due process. So define the rules, enforce them consistently, and tell me what you're doing. I can fix this problem for the CEO of Cloudflare. Just tell me what the rules are. So, but I don't think they get a buy just because they're the underlying hardware of the internet. I think they should be held to exactly the same standards, and they should be held to exactly the same standards of defining, enforcing, and transparency. And by the way, I'll also add that cloud services are going to be extremely difficult. So for example, we've made progress with YouTube on eliminating terror content, but now they're just moving to Google Drive, and Google is saying, well, Google Drive is a cloud service, so it's outside of this platform. So I do think we have to start looking at those core infrastructures.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate your perspective. Frankly, I don't know where I net out on it. I just know it's something that I think we should be looking at
I agree.
and weighing. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Liu, Ms. Francois just talked about level playing field, that the bad guys have a lot more tools and resources than the good guys.
Right.
We talked a lot about the perils of deep fakes, but are there any constructive applications?
Oh,
A
actually,
place where we want to use deep fakes in a good way?
yes, indeed. Actually, the technology behind deepfake, as I mentioned in my opening remark, is dual use. So there is a beneficial side of using this technology. For instance, movie industry can use that, reduce the cost. There are also ways to actually make sure a message can be broadcast to multi-linguistic groups without regenerating the video in different languages. It is also possible to use this technology to protect privacy. For instance, for people like whistleblowers or victims in a violent crime, if they don't want to expose their identity, it's possible to use this kind of technology, replacing the face but leaving the facial expression intact there. So I think there's with the negative effect of deepfake, this kind of technology got a lot of spotlight, but there's also this dual use that we should also be aware of. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Francois, are there any good bots?
Yes, they're really fun. One of them systematically tweets out every edit to Wikipedia that is made from the Congress Internet Infrastructure. In general, what I'm trying to say is they are good bots. Some of them are fun and creative, and I think they do serve the public interest. I do not think that there are good reasons to use an army of bots in order to do coordinated amplification of content. I think when you're trying to manipulate the behavior to make it look like a broader number of people are in support of your content than what it actually is the case, I do not see any particularly good use of that.
I want to send you one of my daughter's bots. She has a perfectly normal Twitter account, and then she has the Twitter bot account where she leverages off of her linguistics background. And I cannot make heads nor tails of what it does. But perhaps
look at
you
it.
can, yeah. She says it's okay, but Dr. Fareed, you talked to be a mistake for the tech giants to transform their systems from end-to-end encrypted systems. That would make the problem only worse. Can you walk us through that?
Sure, and I'm glad you asked the question. So let's talk about what end-to-end encryption is. So the idea is I type a message on my phone, it gets encrypted and sent over the wire. Even if it's a Facebook service, Facebook cannot read the message. Under a lawful warrant, you cannot read the message. Nobody can read the message until the receiver receives it, and then they decrypt. So that's called an end-to-end encryption. Everything in the middle is completely invisible. WhatsApp, for example, owned by Facebook, is end-to-end encrypted, and it is why, by the way, WhatsApp has been implicated in horrific violence in Sri Lanka, in the Philippines, in Myanmar, in India. It has been linked with election tampering in Brazil and India and other parts of the world because nobody knows what's going on the platform. So last year you heard me say 18 million reports to the National Center for Child Sexual Abuse Material. More than half of those came from Facebook Messenger, currently unencrypted. If they encrypt, guess what happens? 10 million images of child sexual abuse material I can no longer see. This is a false pitting of privacy over security, and it's completely unnecessary. We can run PhotoDNA, the technology that I described earlier, on the client, so that when you type the message and attach an image, we can extract that signature. That signature is privacy preserving, so even if I hand it to you, you won't be able to reconstruct the image. And I can send that hash, that signature, along with the encrypted message over the wire, pull the hash off, compare it to a database, and then stop the transmission. And I will mention, by the way, when Facebook tells you that this is all about privacy, is that on WhatsApp, their service, if somebody sends you a link and that link is malware, it's dangerous to you, it will be highlighted in the message. How are they doing that? They are reading your message. Why? For security purposes. Can we please agree that protecting you from malware is at least as important as protecting 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 8-year-olds from physical sexual abuse? We have the technology to do this, and the rush to end-to-end encryption, which, by the way, I think is a head fake. They're using Cambridge Analytica to give them plausible deniability on all of the other issues that we have been trying to get them progress on, from child sexual abuse to terrorism to conspiracies to disinformation. If they end-to-end encrypt, we will lose the ability to know what's going on in their platforms, and you have heard very eloquently from my colleague that this will be a disaster. You should not let them do this without putting the right safeguards in place.
So you were just making a powerful argument now for, at a national and international level, banning end-to-end encryption.
I wouldn't go that far. We want end-to-end encryption for banking, for finance. There are places where it is the right thing to do, but there are other places where we have to simply think about the balance. So for example, in my solution, I didn't say don't do end-to-end encryption. I said put the safeguards in place so that if somebody's transmitting harmful content, I can know about it. I have mixed feelings about the end-to-end encryption, but I think if you want to do it, and we should think seriously about that, you can still put the safeguards in place.
And blockchain is not end-to-end encryption,
No, it is not.
but it gets close.
These are sort of somewhat orthogonal, separate issues, right? What we are talking about is a controlled platform saying that everything that comes through us, we will no longer be able to see. That is super convenient for the Facebooks of the world who don't want to be held accountable for the horrible things happening on their platforms, and I think that's the core issue here.
Great, thanks. Anything else? No. All right. I think Mr. Gonzalez and I are done. And thank you very much. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting mission, and don't be discouraged that there weren't more members here, because everyone's in their office watching this and have their own questions. So thank you very much for being here, and thanks for your witness stuff. And the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members, and additionally, we may have questions of you to answer in writing. So thank you very much. You are excused, and the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. That's good. Where are you from? Ohio.